You know, when you're shooting an intro 34 times and you still can't get it right, you got to step back and say to yourself, Tennessee Fats, maybe you should just shoot from the hip on this one and just give up on all the stuff you're trying to say. Everybody, as you know on this channel, we've already covered 2 Marvel graphic novels that are Conan specific that I thought were kind of interesting, and they were fun to find. And it was interesting because we went through them, we talked about what we thought of them. Then at the end of it, we sort of reflected back on what the takeaway of those books were. So I wasn't really planning on doing a 3rd one of these because honestly, I don't find these things that often, and I didn't expect to find one for quite some time. But then I found something which I guess I've been looking for a long time without even knowing it. Let me show you what we're talking about here. This is Conan and the Ravagers Out of Time. Now, what this is a Marvel graphic novel that came out in 1992. But it's this weird time-traveling story that involves King Kull, Red Sonja, and Conan the Barbarian, all in one book. But what's the weirdest thing about this is this pulls together seeds that were planted in books 20 years prior to the publishing date of this, and continued on in snippets of other stories well after this. I'd read all of those books over the years and wondered, what are they on about? Well, this was it. So everybody, we're going through it today, all right? We're going to go through the book, we're going to go through what I found within it, and we're going to talk about the books that led into it and the ones that come out of it. And then at the end of it, we're going to come back and reflect on some of the themes that really sort of screamed at me in this book. And then you guys can let me know whether you thought the same thing when you found them. Everybody, let's get into the book. Okay, so let's get into the story itself. Now, this is going to be an interesting one because what we're going to do is as we're walking through it, I'll start getting you guys images side by side on whatever side of the screen we go to at any particular point in time, because the book's in too good a shape for me to be creasing it open to basically show you guys page by page. So little OCD comic collector Tennessee Fats is having a hissy fit and won't let me do that. And well, I got to listen to him because he's really whiny. Okay. The story's going to get a little complex. It's a little going to get a lot of complex actually, but don't hate me for it. I didn't write it, but we are going to get to the end together, and when we get there, you're going to be happy. So bear that in mind. Let's take a look at the book at the front and the back. Front cover art is quite nice. I like this. And we clearly have a depiction of Conan, Sonja, and Kull. Great, they're going to be in the story. As well as a giant slug thing. I don't know, long-time Conanophile, maybe you already know what's going to happen here. Slug thing? Anything? Bueller? Anyway, back cover basically gives you a little bit of a story about who's involved and what's going to happen at the beginning of the story. Just enough to make you spend your $7 and buy the book. Quite nice. Square binding is quite nice. Cover material and cardstock are quite nice. This was well put together, and I do like what Marvel did with this. Then we get to our opening page. We find out who wrote this thing. Roy Thomas wrote this thing. That's right. The Roy Thomas wrote this thing. So now, this is where you as a long-term Conanophile that's been reading comics should probably be getting pretty goddamn excited. Because you're going to be saying, this is going to be the poop. Roy Thomas knows Conan the Barbarian. Roy Thomas knows Kull the Conqueror, i.e. King Kull. This is going to be good. Not too used to Roy Thomas Red Sonja other than, as a secondary character, but let's see what happens here as it goes. We open with a splash page, and you have a wagon train heading south from the north end of Turin, and what's basically going to happen is Conan leading the Free Companions is going to attack it. He decides to open up by peppering it with arrows, and then he goes in for the battle where he's going to take it out, because he knows there's gold in this wagon train, and he is leading the Free Companions at this point in time. The battle's fairly short-lived, and what happens is Conan uncharacteristically finds himself in a situation where he's going to get shot with a bow and arrow and killed. I'm not used to seeing that in too many Conan stories, but I'm guessing this is a plot device, because the next thing you know, you have this guy getting pin-cushioned to a wagon wall, and lo and behold, out comes Red Sonja, woo, and everybody's happy. And Conan's like, where the hell did you come from? And she's like, don't ask me stupid questions, we're in the middle of a battle, let's just win the battle, and then we'll have a conversation about where I came from. It's a reasonable thing to say. I honestly have to agree with her on that one. The battle is fairly short-lived, and what happens is there are some survivors from the Turanian. Is that how that's what we're calling them today? The Turanian people who are left over, and Conan offers them an opportunity. He says, listen, I could either kill you, or you could join the Free Companions. And Turanians are like, yeah, let's join the Free Companions. Makes sense to me. Given that choice, I would probably do the exact same thing, even if I didn't want to be part of the Free Companions. What other choices have you got? Well, Conan's existing free companions are mainly Hycurians. So is Red Sonja. And I guess there's no real love lost between the Hycurians and the Turanians because they're on either side of the Sea of Vayet. And I guess what's been happening is they've been raiding one another for quite some time. They're not friends. So the Hycurians do not trust these three Turanians, whatever they are, that are now working with Conan. And the Turanians are not trusting these Hycurians who are working with Conan. And you really have the seed planted here that there is going to be a problem. Conan is having none of this right now because he's like, wagon train full of gold, idiots. Let's go. At this point in time, it turns out that Red Sonja was actually leading this wagon trade full of gold. Not really good leading. And shows them into the back of the wagon where she says, oh, and by the way, we have a guest. And they open it up. And this is where we have the introduction of, I think, what is supposed to be one of the secondary characters in this story, but who turns out to be one of the major characters of the story. And we'll talk about this more later. Gonar the Pict. Gronar the Pict, whatever, the Pict guy. Anyways, he comes out of nowhere at this point in time, and you're like, huh. And Sonya's like, yeah, he hasn't said anything, we captured him. Now, think about how far inland they are, and they have a Pict. That's kind of weird. And Conan's like, hey, isn't this the guy that was in that dream where we met King Kull? And Sonya's like, no, that wasn't a dream, idiot. That was real, and this was the guy, and you did meet King Kull. And Conan, not being the thinking man's king or barbarian, turns around, whatever, a chest full of gold. And they go bust open the chest full of gold, and they throw them out to their own men and say, hey guys, this will buy you some booze, have a good time, woo! And it's all raw gold. Later on, they're around the campfire, and they're saying, Sonja is saying, hey, you know, we went north and we picked up this stuff from some soldiers because they have a mine up there. And Conan's like, maybe we should go raid the mine. Turanians who are with him were like, yeah, you should probably go raid the mine. And the Hycurians like, no, we should not raid the mine. This is obviously a trap led by these idiots. Why are you listening to them? And Conan stabs a knife in the ground and says, we're going north. But before he does it, he goes, you know, when I think about it, I think I actually know where this mine is. Now, if he knew where the mine was, why wouldn't he have just gone there in the first place and not bothered raiding a wagon train? Moot point. He goes back and he says, yeah, you guys, it was this time, a long time ago, when I was working for the King of Turan. I was protecting his princess, and we were captured, and we were taken to this giant tower thing. And suddenly this ape man went and grabbed the princess, so I killed the ape man. And then this giant magic dude is all gold. He's like, hey, look at me, I'm Rotat, the sorcerer, woo, from Lemuria, woo, yay. And by the way, I was killed by Kull, but now I'm back. And by the way, I'm going to murder everybody, but first you're going to go mine my gold, because I want gold. Get in the mines and mine my gold. That's basically how I picture this guy talking. Because he sounds very much like a 1970s-esque pimp that I would expect in a cops and robber type movie. That's how I picture it when I read it. Anywho, so Conan says, yeah, so we were in the mines, and they didn't put us in shackles, which was really weird. So, you know, we tried to escape, and then we discovered why we couldn't escape. It's because the mines were full of this giant 2-story large slug thing that ate gold and people that got in its way. So what we did, since it ate gold, was we led it back to the guy who's made it of gold, and it basically absorbed him, and it turns out that he wasn't entirely gold. Rotas' bones were gold. And then what happened was it ate the bones and then just spat everything out, which is really gross. Just picture a puddle of everything but bones on the ground. And then it just left. And Quinn's, yeah, I know totally where that is. We should just go there. Yeah. And that was when he knife in the ground. That's what you're going to do. Kind of weird. Kind of a weird anecdote, you know? It sort of makes you go, why wouldn't he have just gone there in the first place? That's... Anyway. He then goes off, and this is where we get a weird vignette. And this is where going to be one of the themes we're talking about at the end of this video. This is a seed for that theme, okay? So seed for the theme. Get ready for it, okay? Conan and Sonja wander off, and they're in this beautiful scene where they're in the mountains looking out over the valleys. And Sonja says, hey, whatever happened to you after Mariket? I think that was the name of the city. Anyways, it was a place where they met up. And Conan's like, yeah, after that, you know, and she's like, yeah, you were leaving with some princess. Like, yeah, you know, I was leaving with this princess, and then I found out she was pregnant, you know, her bad husband Prince was after her, but, you know, once I took care of that, and then when I found out she was pregnant, I had to leave her behind, and she's like, Sonny's like, but you left her behind because she's pregnant? And he's like, no, it's because she couldn't handle the road, you see, because I'm a rough and tumble sort of drifter, and she couldn't be out on the road with me with a kid. That's crazy talking. But then something weird happens. Conan says, but you know, now that I'm older, looking back on that soft lifestyle, you know, I could easily see myself settling down. And then he goes, hey, well, it's too late now, and he just sort of wanders off. And you're like, that was weird. Why would Conan be saying something like that? Conan said, who? What? Huh? And he said, oh, are you coming back to the fire? And Red Sonja's like, no, I think I'll just stay here for a bit. Yeah. And you see her standing by herself, just looking out over this giant picturesque scene. And that's the end of the explanation. It's really weird. It's odd, okay? So, seed planted, moving on. Anyways, cutscene, Conan leads them off, and he does them to the north. Now, you think you're going north, you're going to get snow and get colder, but that doesn't happen. He actually leads them into a tropical, temperate environment, and they need to cut down trees to cross a river and then a lake. And after a lot of traveling, because bear in mind there's a group of them, and Gunnar the Pick, by the way, is still with them. They get to this giant pillar thing that Conan was describing earlier, but it's all in ruins. And Conan's like, this doesn't make any sense because, you know, it's only been a couple of years. How could it be in this much ruins? And that's weird. And then they're like, yeah, and where are the soldiers that we got the gold from? Because there's no even sign of them. And that's also weird. And Conan's like, who cares? Gold's over there. Let's go. And he points out the actual hole in the wall where the mines are. And he says, let's go get in there. So everybody grabs a torch. They head off and they leave a couple guys back at the opening. And they wander on in. And at this point in time, what happens is the big betrayal. Remember that seed I planted earlier where I said there's going to be an issue between the Hycurians and the Turanians? Who cares what they're called? Between those guys? Yeah, well, there was a problem. They ended up stabbing the Turanian in the back. This is the Hycurians. And they said, Conan, we got the only torch, so we're going to go get the gold, and you're not going to do anything about it, right? And Conan uncharacteristically says, you're absolutely right. You're going to go get the gold because I don't need it. Have a good time. And Sonja's like, what? I'm sorry, are you Conan or are you some sort of weird body snatcher? Let me see the back of your neck, buddy. And Conan's like, no, trust me. He's already dead. And you see Guy lead off with the torch down the tunnel. And bear in mind that in the earlier cutscene, what we saw was a bunch of corpses on the ground covered in slime that had crystallized. And Conan's like, ooh, that slug thing might be a problem. Well, lo and behold, Guy, who's now been wandering down here with the torch, now comes back screaming, ah, and drops dead. And he's covered in slime. And then we have this large booming voice. And here's where we get giant slug thing, 2-story tall slug thing, barreling down the tunnel after them saying, I want gold, interlopers, I interfered, blah, blah, blah. Not really making a lot of sense with what it's saying. It's basically throwing out all sorts of words telepathically, which doesn't really make sense because if you're a Conanophile and you know who this slug is already, I don't ever remember it speaking telepathically ever. Something is not right here. Well, when you finally see the slug, the entire slug is made out of gold now, which is really weird. And it's demanding gold, and it's sensing gold, and Red Sonja throws some gold to it because she horked some from the chest they opened up earlier when they met Gunnar and in the wagon and all that sort of stuff. And then it turns around and says it wants gold, and and it's demanding things, and it uses the word Rotath. And Conan turns around and is like, Rotath? And this is one of those beautiful Roy Thomas-esque moments. Roy Thomas has the ability to put beautiful lines in his work that just make you really step back and chuckle. Because just picture a 2-story large slug that's been rampaging like a maniac, killing everybody, demanding gold. And when you say Rotath, it just stops everything and turns around and looks at you and says, do I know you? Which is exactly what the slug does. The slug seems to have forgotten the fact that Conan killed it by leading the slug into it. Very strange. Slug then goes on and it says, that's kind of odd, and slows down. And at this point in time, Sonja and Conan say, well, maybe we should stop trying to kill it and we should parlay with it and maybe we can help it. Now, and Rotath's like, yes, help me, that's great. I need a human body because I'm going insane being stuck inside this slug body. So clearly Rotath has taken over the slug body. And he's like, so I want the body of the greatest warrior ever, Kull. Sonja and Conan are like, you mean King Kull, right? He's been dead for like 8,000 years. And Rotath goes nuts. King? This guy's a king? He was nothing but a barbarian. How could he be the greatest king of them all? Blah, 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 blah. And he's not happy with the news. Okay, let's just put it that way. And he explains how basically Kull had killed him and he was dead. when Kull was not even king yet, but just this sort of wandering dude, and how he basically had harvested the skin off of some wandering dude that just happened to find his golden skeleton because he cursed mankind and Kull and everybody else, and that's why he was turned into gold, to be temptation, so that he could slither skin off of people and take over their body. That guy died, by the way. And that's when he got his life, and that's when Conan found him, and that's when the slug then ate him. And he walks through his whole thing, but he's not really putting together that he should not be happy with Conan. It's weird, right? I think it's mostly a sign of him being insane. But then he says, oh, 8,000 years is easy, that's no problem. We'll just go back in time, and I'll solve that problem. And Conan and Sonya are kind of like, why are you telling us this? And he's like, because you're coming with me, woo! It's one of those moments. And then lightning crashes. I could do a treble charger line here, but I'm not going to. Lightning crashes, and then what happens is they find themselves going back in time, falling back in time, while the rest of their companions are struck with lightning and killed, except for Gonnar the Pict. Bear that in mind. They find themselves watching the tower, which was in ruins, slowly being built back up and being back in the condition that Conan remembers seeing it in the first time he met with Rotath. That's kind of weird. Why did it just... Hold on, did they somehow go to the future when they found this thing? I don't know. There's all sorts of time questions I could ask here, and I'm not going to. They find themselves with the tower standing up, and a whole bunch of ape lords come storming out. Ape lords are basically ape men. Come storming out towards them, and they recognize giant golden slug as Rotath, and they start chanting to Rotath, and Conan and Sonya are like, let's GTFO over there. And that doesn't work. They get captured. And at this point in time, Rotath is explaining, and the ape men are explaining, ape lords are explaining, that they knew Rotath would come back. And he left instructions for them to build siege weapons so that they could then go out and conquer Kull's kingdom. That's some excellent planning. This is like Terminator 4 level time jumping messaging going back and forth. This is pretty impressive stuff. Pretty good for 1992. Anyways, that's what's supposed to be happening. Cut scene. We now stop with Hyborian Age characters. You guys go over here for a second. Enter Brule the Spear Slayer. Or the spear something. I don't remember. Brule. Brule of this. Brule, okay? Just Brule. Doesn't matter. Enter Brule with a bunch of red slayers. And he's been watching this whole thing. He's like, this isn't good. We should go back and tell Kull that this is what's happening over here. Because this doesn't look good. Because, we heard about ape lords being over here. And now that we found out that they're here, let's go back. Cut scene back to Kull, who's sitting in his throne, because he's King Kull. And he's bored out of his skull, which is what Kull always is. Kull, 100% of the time, when he is the king, is bored out of his skull. Two, his chief advisor is sitting here, blah, 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 blah. People are blah, 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 taxes. And he's like, oh God, somebody kill me. Brule comes storming in and says, oh my God, my dude, you will not believe this. There are ape lords over there. They're building siege weapons. They're going to attack. And they're chanting something about a guy named Rotath. And Kull just goes balls to the wall crazy. He goes, we're going to war. And just, that's it. 2, F off. Guy talking about taxes, F off. This isn't even one of those cases where Kull's kind of like, well, I'm kind of bored. So yeah, let's go for an adventure. No, this is a case where he hears the name Rotath. He's like, we are at war, and you go storming out, and that's it. Like, clearly there is some bad blood here, because this is just, that was a strange reaction, okay? Roy Thomas knows Kull. There's a reason why he would write that. Somewhat odd, whatever. Anyways, time passes. Kull is now encamped at one side of the desert. On the other side of the desert is Rotath and his ape lord army. And we have a little vignette here. This little vignette has Sonya and Conan, who I guess have been being fed and treated relatively well, even though they're in human cages on wheels. And Sonya is talking to the ape lord that's been guarding them. And she's trying to, convey to him that Rotath doesn't care about him. And that Rotath is going to slaughter his people just so that he can meet his own means. And and knows the guy's name, in fact. But at the same time is kind of inferring that perhaps this guy is just only there because he's really leering at her because he's sexually interested in her, which is kind of weird. But at the same time, you got to cut back to an earlier comment she made when she was first captured, where she says, well, I understand why you're here, but clearly the only reason why I'm here is because Rotath is going to get a man's body. I don't know. I don't know if there was something cringeworthy in there or not, but there was something there. When you put your finger on the pulse of this, there's clearly an issue there that's obviously something that needs to be done, okay? Anyways, Sonya is making friends with Ape Lord here. Well, not really making friends. More so, well, trying to get in his brain. trying to understand what's going on with this dude. And she's like, no, you gotta stop and listen. And suddenly Rotath comes out of nowhere, because clearly he's had nothing to do with Conan and Sonya for some time now. He comes out of nowhere, he's like, no, you listen. All right, Conan, you're gonna go over to this side of the desert and you're gonna bring me Kull. And that's what's gonna happen. And Conan's like, whatever, buddy. And this doesn't go well for Sonya, because Rotath's like, no, you're gonna do this, because if you don't, I'm just gonna take your friend Red Sonja over here and using my telepathy, slam her back and forth in her cage until she's unconscious, which is what he does. And Conan's like, no, you stop that right now. No, you mend all of her cuts and her wounds, and you take good care of her, and I'll take care of this. And Rotath's like, oh, I'll take good care of her. And I'm like, ooh, that was, yeah. That was one of those ooh moments. And I'm sure that was a cringeworthy one. I don't need to question that one. Anyways, Conan rides across the desert, and we cut scene back to the Thurian dudes. So here's Kull, here's Brule. They're having a council of war with two of them. Two-person council, but they're talking with somebody who's a mystical man, somebody magical with a cloak. You could tell they're magical with a cloak because they have a cloak with a hood over their head, because that's how you always picture a wizard, is with a cloak over their head. It's just how I picture wizards. It's very wizard of them. Anyways, so they're talking, and suddenly Hood comes off, and Conan is watching this, and he sees that the person with Hood coming off is Gonar the Pict, and he's like, what the... Dude, I'm 8,000 years before you. How are you here? What is going on? This is all what's going through his mind. And you can only get what's going on through his mind because you're reading it in the language of his eyes. They're just dead eyes staring at you out of the page. That's, I'm sure, what he was thinking. Like a shark's eyes, like a doll's eyes, dead. But that's really what I picture when I'm picturing what's going through Conan's head when he sees this. Anyways, Gonar is like, okay, listen. I can solve this, but it's going to be a huge spell. It's going to need an F ton of time and a lot of blood. And then he goes wandering off. And Brule and Kull are like, is he nuts? Like, I don't know what to make of this guy. And they say, it's okay, because we're friends. And they shake hands, and they have a good, bro moment. And then Kull's like, it's okay. Now, there isn't a problem that I can't solve with my axe. And he pulls up his axe, and he's like, yeah, axe time. Yeah, let's go. And you're like, yeah, great. You're going to kill everybody with your axe. And Brule's like, okay, do you want to head out now? And he's like, no, I want to study these maps some more. You go ahead. Brule walks out, and then there's... And Kull's like, huh, what was that kind of weird noise? So he walks over to the tent, and he's like, hey, opens it on up, and there's Conan with a club, bonks him on the head. Brule's on the ground. Kull's now on the ground. Conan takes Kull's robe, wraps it around himself, takes his golden tiara. I don't think it deserves to be called a crown. A golden tiara, puts it on his head, jumps in Kull's chariot, throws Kull into the back of it, and storms out of camp. And the guards see him storming out because Conan is impersonating King Kull at this point in time. You clearly get that sense. Then he goes storming out, and the guards let him go. And he goes all the way across the desert to the Ape Lords, and he rides in on the Ape Lords and kicks Kull out, and Kull's still unconscious at this point in time, by the way. And Kull suddenly comes to consciousness when he hits the ground, and he sees Red Sonja, and Red Sonja's standing there, and he's like, hey, King Kull, or she's like, hey, King Kull, remember me? And he's like, yeah, you're Sonja, I remember you, woo, yeah. Good times. And then from behind him, oh, do you remember me too? And lo and behold, there comes Conan, and Kull sort of looks and was like, yeah, I know you. Now, I'm starting to get a sense that these two don't get along. Could be. It's rather strange. Well, Rotath doesn't have any time for these two not getting along or for anybody to actually have a conversation. So he pipes up and he says, okay, here's the deal. I want the strongest body of the two of you. So here's what's going to happen. Kull, you're going to fight Conan to the death, and whichever one of you survives, that's the body I'm going to take over. This is how it's going to work. And Kull's like, no, same as Conan. You can tell they're genetically related at this point in time because they're very good at doing this. But that's not what happens, because Kull's like, that ain't happening. And Conan's like, well, if it's the only thing that's going to keep Sonja alive, yeah, I'm up for it. Let's go kill King Kull. Picks up an axe and just goes at him. And you're like, really? Conan, you? The man who's survived so many things, you couldn't come up with something better than let's have at him? And here's where we get a vignette of another weird thing in the story. Sub-theme right now. Over to the side. So, why is it at this point in time that you hear Sonja saying, no, Conan, if you're going to fight, don't fight for my sake, fight for yours. Fight for yours. Weird. Another seed planted, by the way, for what we're going to talk about later. Anywho, at this point in time, while they're battling, and this whole thing's going on, this turns into an epic battle, and really from the language in this battle, I'm going to get through this rather quickly, you clearly get a sense that Conan is the aggressor, okay? Now, this is happening because Roy Thomas knows these characters really, really, really well, okay? Conan is the I'm going to go and be a speed junkie and just get GSD and get shit done. That's what he does. And somehow he becomes king. Great. Maybe times have changed, but that's how he makes it. Cull is not that. Cull is the brooding, more cautious, well, GSD dude. He's definitely a warrior and a barbarian, but he's not the guy that's out there doing stupid things for the sake of doing stupid things. He's out there doing stupid things for a purpose. So here you have these two juxtaposed characters, the same level of aggressive animosity out of either of them when they choose to click it in. But at this point in time, Cull ain't clicking it in. Now, Conan kind of mocks him to a point, and they have a whole debate about the crown and this debacle of I won't see it on your head. And the whole language in this does not make any sense to me whatsoever. It seems to me like literally, it's almost to the point where you would argue that they were being mind controlled to a point to lead to why they were going to fight to this level of severity. Because honestly, you do not understand why these things are coming out of their mouths. I think I'm just going to stop there. That's all you need to know. And at the end of the day, after a very prolonged battle, what happens is equipment failure. Cull's axe basically breaks in half when he's about to kill Conan. And Rotath says, great, okay, well, Conan, you win, kill Cull. And he's like, no, I would never kill somebody just because of equipment failure. That's kind of a cheap shot. And then he throws his axe at Rotath. And Rotath is like, axe? Are you kidding me? Like, I'm a 2-story tall golden slug. Are you not paying attention here? I'm also a super powerful wizard that brought you back 8,000 years in time by saying a word. I don't know. Anyways, it doesn't really matter because this is the point in time when Cull's army decides to attack. Now, just like the whole Cull and Conan battle was long and drawn out and really weird, and it just the whole Valusian army versus Ape Lord army battle is not drawn out and weird, but it clearly is a war of attrition. And clearly Roy Thomas is trying to communicate to us that what's happening here is that these Ape Lords have no magic to them whatsoever. Their leader is busy basically bickering with Conan and Cull. Sonya's not really having much to do with it. And these guys are out on their own. The larger problem here is that they are massively outnumbered. Now, the Ape Lords have always been promised that Rotath's magic will see them win. But the magic is kind of busy right now with a 2-story tall slug that's arguing with 2 idiots. Things aren't going to go well here for these guys, and it's clearly in tone that it isn't going to go well. They lose, basically by power of attrition. 2 armies effectively are wiped out. It just happens to be that there's more Valusian army men than there are Ape Lords. So end of the day, more of them are alive than these guys. So that's basically how the battle is won, just through straight attrition. We're talking full World War I trench battle type garbage here. That's dark. That is really, really dark. Because not only are you talking about Rotath basically wiping out his own army. He's the bad guy. Okay, I could buy that. But you're talking about Cull basically willing to lead his army into a battle where the majority of them he was willing to wipe out just because when the word Rotath was said to him, he was like, it's on. Like, that's weird. And I don't really understand that story based on what I'm getting in this graphic novel. That's a seed that we're going to pick up a little bit later, okay? So bear that in mind. Anywho, while the battle's going on and while Giant Slug is bickering with these 2 idiots and Sonya, who's really just being a secondary character to these 2 idiots being idiots, you see Gonar the Pict from 18,000 years ago dancing along and casting a spell. And it carries on for pages that he's carrying on this spell. And suddenly at the end of it, he says, by Valka's will it be done. And Giant Slug explodes. And you clearly by reading the text are told that the golden skeleton within Giant Slug explodes into basically nothing but fibers. So Gonar's spell actually killed Rotath. So Cull's already killed Rotath. Conan's killed Rotath. Now Gonar's just killed Rotath. But this time it looks like it's for good. Like, that skeleton was destroyed. There's nothing left to it. That's a harsh one. We then cut scene to the whole thing coming back together now. The whole group of them are now standing together. 8 men, you have a sense that some of them are left alive because you kind of see them in the background, but you know that this really is just a case of attrition. And Conan and Sonya are again looking at Gonar, and Cull pipes up with Brule and says, well, hold on, you said this spell was going to take a lot of time and so much blood. And Gonar pipes up and he's like, well, yeah, there was tons of blood. Both of your armies just got wiped out. And oh, by the way, and I had tons of time because these two came back from 8,000 years in the future, and they brought all that time with them that I needed. Yeah, yeah. Bear that in mind. Another seed we're going to pick up a little bit later. But at the end of the day, Conan says, but it's okay because Rotath is dead now. So now all of his spells are going to undo. So you guys are going to go back to your time. He's looking at Conan and Red Sonja at this point in time. And we'll stay here because this is where we're supposed to be. And Conan's like, oh, well, if I'm going back to my time, I'm going to toss your crown back to you, King Kull, because, you know, it doesn't fit in the tiara, by the way, that I'm talking about. And that was a really weird thing. I don't understand why between Kull and Conan they had to have some big fight about crowns. That was just, I don't know, plot device. They then go back to the future. Kull, Brule, Gonar are talking around. Like, time is immaterial. It's everywhere all at once. Everything everywhere all at once sort of thing. And you're like, okay, well, I guess Kull, being the thinking man's barbarian king, is like, yeah, okay, makes sense to me. Yep, I'm good with that. I stared in the mirror as Thusan Thune. I know exactly what you're talking about. We're good. That's the end of the Thurian side of this story. Conan and Sonja get teleported to the future, where they basically reappear a couple feet above where the ground level was, because it's obviously sunk over 8,000. Why it's sunk instead of going, I don't know. And there's Gonar from the time when they left, standing there going, hey guys. And Sonja's like, man, that Kull guy was pretty awesome, you know? I could have settled down with him. And Conan's like, what about your vow? And Sonja's like, no, I made that vow now. That was 8,000 years ago. That was before I ever made the vow. It's all good. Okay, another seed planted for a story we're going to pick up later. And they're talking to Gonar, and Gonar's like, yeah, it's fine. He talks some more riddles, and nobody understands what they're saying. He says, let's go off and have some adventures together. Woo! And that's basically the story. Kind of a weird one, but you know, it did get us there at the end of the tale. Now, let's first take a look at the books that lead into this, and then the books that lead out of this, because I know there's a lot of questions about, how did we get here to begin with? And then, well, what happened to that afterwards? And then we're going to come back and talk about the two themes that I think were the big ones that come out of this that really weren't screaming at us in the story, but that were clearly there. You guys can let me know if you agree or not. All right, let's start talking about the actual issues that chronologically come into this that created that puzzle I talked about where you were like, what are they on about? There are so many little droplets of this story in the Marvel Universe. If you missed it, you really aren't buying enough Conan. Okay, let's just put that out there. Let's start chronologically, though, where we get the introduction to some of the first things in the story. Obviously, one of the first things we're going to run to here, and the biggest issue, is Rotath, okay? And the Rotath in that backstory of he was killed by Kull, and then he was brought back, and then he was killed by Conan. Well, that happens in this book. This is Conan the Barbarian number 37. Now, this is an older one. It's a 20th center, and it's an interesting story because in this, you get the full story of the Slug. You get the full story of how Kull had killed Rotath when he was just a barbarian, and how the wandering person that was a hillman basically found Rotath's skeleton, which was made out of gold. It's Rotath of Lemuria, by the way, just in case you're wondering where he was from, and how he had had his flesh oozed off and rebuilt Rotath into the golden person that he was, which was then eaten by the Slug, which then in turn took over the Slug, which it's a long convoluted thing, but this is the story that leads you there. Now, you do have a 2-page splash that's within that graphic novel, The Ravagers Out of Time, which walks through, here's what Conan ran into in that story. And I do believe that does it justice. Do you need to read this book in order to read that graphic novel? Not necessarily, but you know what? It does add a nice little piece of background there if you are curious about it. So that's the first piece that we're going to go into. The second reference backwards in this one, you'll remember when they first went into that wagon that was part of that wagon train that they looted, when they ran into Gonar, and Conan said, hey, weren't you that guy that was in that dream where I met King Kull, and Sonja, you were there too, and so was Bellet, and Sonja's like, dude, that was not a dream. Would you stop saying it was a dream? That all happened in this. This is Conan the Barbarian number 68. This is, I guess, what you would call the first meeting of Conan and King Kull. And lo and behold, right down here, Red Sonja and the she-pirate Bellet was in this story. And again, this is one where I gather what's happening is you have that whole Gonar time traveling thing going back and forth because Conan clearly references, all right, you're the guy that was there that brought Kull into this whole mess where, you know, Bellet was there and Sonja was there. Alluded to in the story. Not necessarily something you need to know, but if you were wondering what the hell they were wondering out about in that story, The Ravagers Out of Time, this is the book that leads you there. That's the one. This is where Kull knows Sonja and Conan from previously before you get to the graphic novel. Now, another thing that I mentioned earlier, remember I talked about the whole King Kull and Gonar being there with him, and that there was a Gonar then. You actually already know that Kull has a Gonar. And the reason you know that Kull has a Gonar is because Kull had a Gonar way back here in Savage Sword of Conan number 42, which I believe continues in number 43. In this is where you have the actual meeting of Kull and Bran Mak Morn. And in that story, Gonar is the one that transports Kull to the year 200 AD when the Romans are invading England, and he meets up with Bran Mak Morn and helps him fight off the Romans, and is then brought back in time to his own time, where he wakes up and he's covered in cuts and bruises and feels exhausted, and he's like, oh, maybe it wasn't a dream. So that's one of the first chronological alliterations you have in comic format of when you're going back and forth in time, or at least you know Kull is aware of the ability to go back and forth in time with Gonar, which kind of drops that drop in the bucket of, so is Gonar in 18,000 years ago talking to Konar of 10,000 years ago, and they're aware of one another? Kind of a weird one, kind of odd. Now, another piece in this that's been out there in the Marvel Universe for a while, and I'm gonna go with the one that's actually the latter of the two. But if you were out there and you were picking this up, you already know. This is the Kull the Barbarian, Kull the Savage, sorry, original Marvel Years Omnibus. And I did a video for this, and I'm gonna put a card for this up over here for you guys if you actually wanna go through my review of this. I have a bunch of other Kull ones on there as well, because I've got all three of the Omnibus reviewed. But this one in particular actually covers the story which leads to what Rotath is talking about. When Rotath was talking about the fact that Kull had killed him as a barbarian, for me that was one where it kind of triggered. And it triggered for me because I actually got my hands on this book, which is Savage Sword of Conan number 223, which 229, my mistake, 229. First, I actually got my hands on this and read this and read the Kull story in it, which I then reread when I got this and got a sense of what was going on. Because when he was talking about Kull killing him, and remember I referenced back earlier and I thought to myself, gee, do I remember reading something where Kull did that? Well, I didn't remember reading that in comic form, but it is actually in here. In 1995, I believe, was when Marvel actually went to the process of writing out the continuation of this story for Kull, which was where he was a barbarian and enslaved and was sent to kill Rotath of Lemuria. And he ends up meeting a wolf person there, and yes, he does meet ape lords there while he's at it. It is a long, convoluted story, but he does actually go through the process of explaining it. So the seed that was planted back in Conan the Barbarian number 37, which was continued in 1992 in the Ravagers of Time, was then actually backwritten through these issues in 1995. It's fascinating to me that years later is when they did that piece. Now, the real kicker for me, though, that made me think this story had to exist somewhere was actually in this one, which is the one I pulled up earlier incorrectly. Savage Sword of Conan number 223, Conan and Red Sonja in a Time-Twisted Tale. And it actually continues in 234. And the reason why this led me to think this had to be the story that I was thinking it was once I saw the cover on it, was the fact that this is what happens with Conan and Sonja and Gonar after they get back to the Hyborian Age. They come back and they allude to the fact that they just had a time-traveling adventure where they met King Kull. And when I read that, I thought, are you talking about Conan the Barbarian number 68? Because I didn't know this existed yet. So this actually is the continuation of the story when they're coming back. And they're back in the Hyborian Age, and they're talking about, oh, that's what happened with Kull. Fascinating story where this was, when was this? This was 1994. They wrote this before they wrote the actual backstory of Kull killing Rotath of Lemuria. There is so much backward and forward planning in this. It's incredible. And I honestly, hats off to Roy Thomas for his ability to do it. Well done. All right, now we've got the actual books that lead into this, and we understand what those are. And we also get the books that lead out of this. Let's take a minute here and we'll talk about the actual themes. Two of the big themes that I think were in this that were kind of made secondary on purpose, but when you think about what their implications are fairly major. So number one, let's talk about the elephant in the room. What the hell is on about with Gonar? What is with this guy? Okay. park this for a second. So you have a Gonar, the Pict. I hope I say that guy's name. Gonar. We're going to go Gonar. You have a Gonar the Pict 18,000 years ago. You have a Gonar the Pict 10,000 years ago. And if you've actually read the King Kull meeting Bran Mak Morn's story, you also have a Gonar the Pict that existed 1,800 years ago. So you've got 3 different Gonars here that all seem to look the exact same. They all seem to talk in riddles. They all seem to cast magical spells. And they just seem to continue, and all of them seem to be saying the same things, that time is immaterial. Let's bear this in mind here. Take a step back. The Gonar that was from 18,000 years ago, when he was talking to Cullen Brule, was very clear. He said, this is going to need a lot of blood and a lot of time. And remember the comment I made where he said, these two came back and brought 8,000 years of time with them. Well, did they actually bring time with them? This is almost a Hyborian conspiracy theory, but it's not quite, but it is almost there. Could it be that Gonar is actually the same guy? Could it be that this guy is actually literally outside of our sense of time? And even though in the Bran Mak Morn story they talk about him communing with his own ancestor, is he actually talking to himself in his dreams? Is he actually the same dude with the same memories, making them backwards and forwards in time by talking to himself in time over 18,000 years? It's not like Conan and Sonya literally brought a bucket full of time with them. I'm willing to bet, and this is an interesting one, when Giant Slug Dude electrified everybody else and took those two back in time 8,000 years, Gonar was still left sitting there. Why? Because Gonar couldn't be destroyed by that guy. Number one, assumption number one. If you've been around for 18,000 years, I'm willing to bet a slug isn't going to hit you with a lightning bolt. Number two, I'm willing to bet that at the same time Gonar the Pict that we saw in the comic was carrying on his actual ceremony and casting his spell 18,000 years ago, that Gonar the Pict 10,000 years ago, the one that was left behind, was doing the exact same thing. I'm willing to bet that you had an actual connection between the two, which was what created the time that allowed this guy to get the power he needed, or this one of him, to get the power he needed to blow up Giant Slug and subsequently blow up Skeleton. That's fairly material. Think about this. Are we talking about Gonar the Pict from the Hyborian Age and the Therian Age actually being one of the most powerful characters in the Marvel Universe that literally has been alive for 18,000 years, that's sitting under the radar, that nobody's noticing, and 0 people have diagnosed him yet as being this super powerful dude? What the hell is he doing on our Earth now? I haven't read a lot of this stuff to actually tell you what Gonar the Pict might be doing today. Maybe Marvel's answered that question. If any of you know the answer to that question, tippity down below. If Marvel's thrown Gonar into a modern story, I would love to know how that actually played out. Because as it is right now, I got a pretty serious idea in my head. This Gonar guy might be one of the most powerful people on the planet. And that's pretty damn horrifying. Okay, theme number 2. So we're setting that first one aside now. What the hell was Red Sonja on about? Is she actually mellowing out? Was Marvel literally implying that Red Sonja, after this whole story, was actually willing to settle down? I think they were. Now here's my reasons why. Hear me out on this one. Number one, when they had the whole conversation after the fire at the beginning of this one, Conan had this wonderful cathartic moment where he was talking about how he's aged and he's learned more and he's calmed down. He's willing to accept this softer lifestyle of a wife and family and an actual, literally a normal life at their time. And then he says, I'm going to go back to bed. Are you coming? No, I'm going to stay here. And she stands there staring off into the darkness, folding her arms, and she's thinking, what is she thinking about? Is she actually thinking about settling down? Is she actually thinking about, damn, I missed my opportunity to settle down with that guy? Is that a self-reflective moment of regret? Is she thinking, actually, if he's going to settle down now, maybe now is the time for me to actually start having this conversation with him? But you know, you got this pesky vow thing in here. I don't know if that goes that far, but clearly there's a moment of reflection there, and it's specifically with regards to the idea of settling down, because why the hell else would she have had this moment of reflect? There wasn't anything else that he said that was like earth-shattering, so that's kind of odd. Number 2. when she's sent back in time, she's very clear. She's like, listen, the only reason this guy brought me here is because he's going to be coming back into a man's body. Well, that kind of fits the Red Sonja we know. The Red Sonja we know will not be with a man, and I honestly think spends most of her time worried about what men are thinking about her, because she knows she won't be with a man until they beat her fairly in battle. I think that's one of those subplots within the character, that she actually is thinking about this a fair amount of the time. Could be wrong, but that's my read on it. But then she's sort of having this conversation with Ape Lord guy, like, why are you leering at me, sort of thing. This is an Ape Lord thing. And then later on, when Ape Lord thing kind of shows up during the battle between King and Cull, and he's like, and he even says to her, he's like, why is your race so self-centered? Why would you think I would find you attractive as a female? Which is kind of one of those eye-opening moments, and really a good one. But I didn't do it in the synopsis because it didn't really bear into the story too much. But that was another moment where, like, okay, you're clearly thinking about the male-female dynamic. But then when they get back to the future, and they're in the present time, she makes a comment that she could have actually been with Cull. She was interested in being with Cull, and made the comment, well, I made my vow now. That was 8,000 years ago. It was long before I made my vow. So I would have been totally fine. And you're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. You're literally willing to bend the logic on your vow based on time to be with Cull. Are you seriously thinking about settling? Are you actually dropping hints that you're thinking about settling down now? And that you're willing to settle down now? Given the fact that you literally just had a conversation with Conan, which I guess would have been chronologically maybe a week or so in the past, because they went back in time and were there for a while, about settling down? Is this what you're doing here? Like, I don't know. Maybe that's where Roy Thomas was taking this, and taking this whole female character of Red Sonja, and was the idea going forward. Maybe she was going to think of I don't know. If any of you know, tippity down below. These two themes were ones that for me were just screaming out of this book, that were just subtext, that were just like blowing up in your face. Like, what the hell? Donar being this powerful? And is Red Sonja seriously thinking about calming down and settling down? So weird. All right, it's time to wrap this one up. So, what did we really get from this story? Well, I'll tell you, I thought this was a really funny story. Funny in a strange way, but in a way that really communicated with me. And the reason I say that is because this helped fill in a giant hole that was sitting in the puzzle between all these snippets that you picked up over the years from these other books. And it really tied it all together well. To me, I think this was a prime example of Roy Thomas absolutely knowing the character of Conan the Barbarian, and absolutely knowing the character of Cull, or King Cull. Now, the Red Sonja thing, I think, and again, I could be wrong, I think he knows that character quite well as well, but I do think that he was trying to do something different with it. I don't know if this was something that may have been laid out in a storyboard at Marvel and that was never picked up, or if this was picked up. I honestly don't know enough about the Red Sonja character to speak to it, so I'm not going to give an opinion on that one, but I am going to talk to the two that I do know, which is Cull and Conan. Very fun book, a wonderful piece that fit into that puzzle, and it floors me to think that Marvel may have had the foresight 20 years ahead of time to stick this in a story knowing they were going to pick it up later, or that they actually said to themselves 20 years later, geez, you know that story we did way back then? I would love to continue that. That I find absolutely fascinating. I think they did a great job with it. Everybody, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you enjoyed this format. We're doing the flippy side-by-side thing with the images. Honestly, it's a heck of a lot easier for me to shoot a lot of these, and I think it's a little more dynamic for you guys to watch. If you agree, tippity down below. If you like the channel, give it all by means subscription, and if you like the video, give her a thumbs up. Everybody, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you have yourself a great day, and I hope to see you in the next one.